context is everything, so let's set the stage. We're about to dive deep into a situation in Ecuador that I think reveals something really crucial about modern governments. It's about how they can, when facing intense internal dissent, quickly repurpose these incredibly powerful, internationally backed tools.
Right, tools designed for really serious global crimes.
Exactly. Things like anti-money laundering, counterterrorism financing.
Yeah.
And then point them directly at their own political opposition. We're pulling from a really significant body of work on this, specifically a Human Rights Watch report. It was documented and published through the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, the OCCRP.
A very credible source.
Absolutely. And the focus is this highly controversial sweeping action, the sudden freezing of bank accounts belonging to leading indigenous and environmental groups in Ecuador.
And that's so important here.
That's the twist.
Yeah.
Authorities justified these freezes using financial crime laws, and they said they were relying on secret, undisclosed intelligence reports.
Yeah.
They moved with, immense speed.
But here's the kicker.
This is the critical flaw. When the targeted groups took the government to court, judges later ruled, and not just once, but in multiple instances, that the government had completely failed to provide any credible evidence to back up their claims.
So they inflicted the damage first?
Maximum damage first, based on secret info, and then just failed the basic test of judicial review.
And that whole procedural sequence, that's what makes this deep dive so essential today. Our mission, really, is to dissect this mechanism. We need to analyze how the Ecuadorian government was legally empowered to do this, to execute these financial seizures so rapidly.
And what the fallout was.
The devastating immediate ripple effect it had on legitimate civil society operations. And then, we have to really rigorously examine HRW's critique.
And that critique is what exactly?
It's that this isn't just a case of political overreach. It's a profound global concern about the weaponization of these very sophisticated financial compliance safeguards. So we'll synthesize the exact timeline, linking the political firestorm on the streets directly to this administrative action. We'll look at the specific organizations that were targeted and then analyze the crucial legal battles that followed.
Battles which, as you said, they sort of won in court, but it sounds like the damage was already done.
Exactly. The judicial victories, they failed to undo the core damage or that lasting chilling effect. This whole story is really a case study in how the language of compliance can be used to silence dissent.
Okay, let's start with the political backdrop then. These account freezes, they began around September 19th, 2025. And you're saying they weren't just random bits of bureaucracy?
Not at all. They were directly synchronized with a period of significant public upheaval. Real political volatility across Ecuador, all triggered by the agenda of the new president, Daniel Noboa.
So what was driving people into the streets? What was putting the government under so much pressure that they'd resort to something like this?
There are two main flashpoints, both tied to economic and environmental policy. These are what drove the public resistance and, provided the immediate context for these financial actions.
Right, what was the first one?
The first, and maybe the most socially explosive issue, was the plan to eliminate diesel subsidies.
Okay, and for listeners in, say, the U.S. or Europe, it can be hard to grasp just how significant that is in a place like Ecuador.
It really can. These subsidies are a deeply entrenched measure. They're meant to stabilize the cost of transportation, which affects everything.
So when you get rid of them?
The cost of diesel just skyrockets. Yeah. And that doesn't just affect the price at the pump for your car. It immediately translates into massively increased costs for everything that needs to be transported.
The food, goods.
Food, agricultural goods, construction materials, public transit. For the most vulnerable, for rural and low-income communities, eliminating diesel subsidies can be the difference between making ends meet and falling into really severe poverty.
So it's a genuine economic lifeline being cut.
That's why this issue historically galvanizes these huge, often disruptive protests. They're led by powerful indigenous and labor movements across the country. It's a very big deal.
And that indigenous movement in particular has a history of forcing governments to back down on these kinds of reforms. So it's a high-stakes battle. What was the second major point of contention?
The second point is all about resource extraction and environmental protection. It was the approval of a very controversial, large-scale mining project in the southern province of Azuay.
Another classic flashpoint.
It's a huge one. The scale of modern mining operations, especially when they involve foreign concessions, it almost inevitably brings immediate and profound resistance.
From who, primarily?
Primarily from indigenous groups and local environmental organizations. They are, rightly concerned about their land rights, the sanctity of their water sources, which is a huge issue in mountainous regions, and the potential for just irreversible ecological damage.
And they don't just protest quietly.
No, these groups aren't just filing lawsuits. They're organizing on the ground, they're blocking roads, they're actively interfering with the initial site preparations. So you pair that existential threat of mining with the economic pain of the subsidy cuts.
And you have a society that's primed for mass mobilization.
Precisely. And that is the exact moment when the government chose to implement these financial controls.
So if you're looking at the timeline, you see the political temperature just shooting up.
Yeah.
The protests are peaking. And then instead of, I don't know, sending in the military like in the olden days,
they deploy an administrative financial weapon.
So how did they do it? How did they achieve this unprecedented level of financial seizure so fast?
It all hinges on a brand new, fast-tracked piece of legislation. It's called the Social Transparency Law.
A new law? Brand new. And crucially, this law was drafted and passed only in August 2025, just a matter of weeks before the first account freezes began.
That seems highly convenient.
Or perhaps intentionally strategic. It seems this powerful new mechanism was put in place just as political tensions were about to boil over.
And what was this law designed to do, officially?
Officially, it's framed as enhancing Ecuador's anti-money laundering framework, their AML rules, and ensuring better financial governance. But its core power, the one that was used against the activists, is what really matters here.
Which is?
It empowers authorities, specifically Ecuador's Financial and Economic Analysis Unit, which is their equivalent of a powerful financial crimes agency, to unilaterally suspend financial access for an individual or an organization.
Unilaterally.
And here is the defining characteristic. This is a massive procedural shift and a huge civil liberties concern. They can execute these freezes without getting a prior court order. It's a financial quick draw mechanism. Wow, that is a staggering amount of power to hand over. In a typical, rule of law system, to seize assets, the state has to show probable cause to a judge before they act.
Right.
This new law basically flips that whole constitutional safeguard on its head.
Precisely. The stated legal threshold for action is that the authorities only need to claim they have objective, serious, and verifiable evidence of suspicious activity.
Which could be anything from money laundering to
terrorism financing. And that phrase, objective, serious, and verifiable, it sounds reassuringly rigorous, right? But the critical catch is that the judicial review only happens after the accounts have been frozen, sometimes weeks or even months later.
So the government gets to impose what is effectively a financial death sentence for an indefinite period, and the organization is left bankrupt, having to fight for its survival in court.
Absolutely. HRW points out that this post-facto review process is deeply detrimental to civil liberties. The damage is immediate, it's crippling, and it's often irreversible. It destroys donor trust, prevents salary payments, halts critical work.
And even if the court eventually says, oops, our mistake,
the harm has been done. The group's capacity to organize dissent is severely compromised.
So this is where the stated legal reason meets the political reality on the ground. President Noboa himself gave the official justification, right? He claimed publicly that the frozen funds were being used to destabilize his administration.
He framed it as a matter of national security, a defense against internal subversion.
And that framing is critical.
It is. The government wants the public and the international community to believe they're fighting, clandestine foreign influence or illegal financing aimed at political disruption. It tries to elevate the issue from a simple policy disagreement to a necessary fight against financial crime.
But the immediate and crucial counterbalance, as the sources highlight, is that the groups affected, the indigenous and environmental groups, they just categorically rejected this.
Vehemently. They see this entirely through a political lens. To them, this isn't an AML operation. It's a direct, aggressive, retaliatory measure for their legitimate opposition to the diesel cuts and the mining project.
So this is the core problem we're unpacking here.
It is. The action is dressed up in the sophisticated, internationally recognized language of fighting financial crime, the kind of language that triggers cooperation from international banks and agencies. But the context, the timing, the specific targets, it all strongly suggests the primary goal was the political neutralization of effective opposition during a high-stakes period of national tension.
The social transparency law was essentially a custom-built legal weapon for fast, preemptive financial suppression.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So if the political context set the stage, let's look at what it actually felt like for these organizations. Moving on to the immediate practical impact of this crackdown.
Yeah.
The sheer scope of the freeze was, well, breathtaking.
It was. They cast a remarkably wide net. It wasn't just the main institutional accounts of the organizations that were blocked. They targeted the accounts of several key environmental and indigenous groups, yes, but also the personal accounts belonging to their leaders, and in some cases, the individual bank accounts of regular staff members.
That's a different level.
Yeah.
That's personal.
It is, and that targeting strategy is designed to create a maximal chilling effect. It expands the threat far beyond the legal entity and into the personal, daily lives of the activists.
If your own personal savings, the account you use to pay your rent, can just be frozen without warning.
Based on secret intelligence, yeah. The risk associated with being an activist becomes prohibitively high.
And the practical impact, as detailed in the HRW interviews, it was immediate and absolutely catastrophic.
It was. We have to remember, these are often small, lean operations running on very tight budgets. I mean, imagine you're trying to run a health clinic in the Amazon or a community education workshop, and suddenly every single dollar vanishes.
Total paralysis.
Groups reported that the freezes crippled essential community programs. Things like monitoring water quality or providing primary education. They halted the payment of salaries for all staff, and they disrupted crucial environmental projects that often have very strict timelines.
And the suddenness of it all.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any due process, any notification that an investigation was underway?
None whatsoever. And that suddenness was clearly part of the strategy. Organizations often only learned about the freezes when a critical financial function failed.
How so?
They'd go to an ATM to withdraw funds for payroll, and the transaction would be denied. Or they'd check their bank statement and see a large anticipated donor transfer had bounced.
Oh, well.
It was a complete, unannounced financial blackout. It left them entirely in the dark about the legal basis for the action, beyond a vague citation of this new law.
Let's get into some specific cases that really illustrate this point. Let's start with Alianza Taibo. This is a fundamental group in the indigenous rights movement in Ecuador, right?
It is. It's a coalition representing 4 distinct Amazonian nations: the Waorani, the Sikapai, the Ayacofan, and the Siona. Their work is often focused on territorial defense, land demarcation against resource exploitation.
So they are literally on the front lines of this stuff.
Exactly. The specific action against them happened on October 5th. The Financial Crimes Agency froze 3 of their accounts, citing, again, those undisclosed intelligence reports.
And the funding context here is key, I imagine.
It is essential because it really exposes the absurdity of the government's claim that this was dirty money used for destabilization.
Why? Where did their money come from?
The blocked funds included money derived from projects that were actively backed and funded by the European Union and the United States government.
Wait, really? The EU and the US?
Yes. These are highly scrutinized, internationally transparent development funds. Blocking these accounts meant disrupting aid and development work that was already subject to rigorous auditing and donor oversight.
So the Ecuadorian government was essentially telling the EU and the US that the funds they provided to a recognized NGO were being used for terrorism or money laundering without having to prove it.
That's what it amounts to. And it carries huge diplomatic and reputational risk.
I can imagine. And the consequences for Alianza Taibo?
Severe. Their field activities stopped dead. They couldn't pay local community leaders their stipends. They couldn't fund the fuel needed for river patrols to monitor for oil incursions. They couldn't purchase basic supplies for their education programs. Their entire operational structure, built over years of international collaboration, was dismantled in a single day.
And how long did this paralysis last for them?
The funds remained blocked for weeks, right during a critical period of public resistance. The group finally got a ruling from a judge on November 5th, a full month after the freeze.
What did the judge say?
The judge ordered the accounts restored, and this ruling is the key indictment of the whole process. The judge found that the authorities, after being legally compelled to present their objective, serious, and verifiable evidence, ultimately failed to provide any. They acted on a claim they could not defend in court.
Okay, then we have the case of UDAP-T. That's the Union of People Affected by Texaco Chevron.
Right, a group that focuses on the generational fight for environmental justice against historical oil contamination in the Amazon.
A huge, famous case.
It is. And the scale of the blockade against them was even more comprehensive. All 14 accounts linked to UDAPT were blocked simultaneously.
14.
All of them. That level of total financial seizure suggests an intent not just to investigate, but to guarantee financial extinction. You cannot operate a modern organization, especially one engaged in complex international litigation, with 14 frozen bank accounts.
And did their legal battle play out similarly to Alianza Sabo's?
Very closely. A judge also lifted the freezes on UDAPT's accounts on November 5th, the same day. So it confirms that judicial pattern. The administrative actions were executed rapidly, but they just lacked the necessary legal foundation. The court said, essentially, your secret evidence doesn't hold up.
But I remember reading a detail about some bureaucratic resistance here that seems deeply concerning. Even after the court ruled on November 5th, the money didn't just reappear, did it?
No, it did not. And this is a critical detail that shows the lingering power of the executive branch and its ability to, well, slow walk compliance.
So what happened?
Despite the clear judicial order, the banking regulator did not immediately restore access to UDP funds. UDP only got their money back after they secured repeated judicial orders, demanding compliance.
How long did that take?
That delay process took nearly 2 additional weeks after the original ruling was issued.
So think about what that means. The court has already stated the government's action was illegal, and the freeze has to be lifted. Yet the government's regulatory arm deliberately extended the crippling financial impact for another 2 weeks. It serves as a form of continued punishment, doesn't it?
It's a way to discourage them. It prolongs the organization's inability to pay lawyers, staff, or operational costs, even with a legal victory in their pocket.
So if we step back, what does this tell us? We have 2 organizations, one focused on land rights, the other on corporate oil accountability. Both critical voices against resource extraction, and both were just financially paralyzed.
Right. The government used a new law to strike instantly, citing high crimes, only for the evidence to completely fail under judicial review. But the damage had already been done. The message was sent.
The message was loud and clear.
It was. Engagement in high-profile political dissent, even when you're funded by traceable international sources, carries the immediate risk of financial obliteration, regardless of the legality of the initial action. It forces every donor and every staff member to question whether the work is worth this immense personal and institutional risk.
This whole trajectory brings us squarely to the profound legal contradictions at the heart of this deep dive. We've established that courts overturned at least some of these freezes because the authorities failed to submit the required documentation.
And that failure is so significant.
How so?
It confirms that the standard required by the social transparency law, that need for objective, serious, and verifiable evidence, was basically political posturing. The government had the power to hit the financial kill switch, but they lacked the legal ammunition to defend that choice when they were finally challenged in an impartial court.
That failure is the core legal vulnerability, but it's not the whole story. The irony is, as you said, the government achieved maximum disruption anyway.
Which leads directly to the question of why they failed to provide the documentation. And this is where the legal system became a functional black hole, thanks to a second piece of legislation, the intelligence law.
Okay, another law.
Yes. During the court hearings, when judges were demanding that evidence, the objective, serious, and verifiable evidence officials from both the Financial Crimes Agency and, critically, the National Intelligence Center, they just declined to release the information. They refused to show the basis for their decision.
And what was their defense for withholding evidence from a sitting judge? I mean, how can you do that?
They cited Ecuador's recently approved intelligence law. They claimed that the intelligence they relied on to trigger the freeze was protected national security information and could not, under the provisions of this new intelligence law, be shared in open court or with the defense.
Wait, hold on. Let me just break this down to make sure we're all following this.
Go ahead.
The social transparency law says you need objective proof to freeze accounts. But the intelligence law says the proof we used is secret, and we can't show it to the judge who is reviewing the action.
That's it.
Is that an intentional structural conflict? Is it designed to create an accountability loophole?
That is precisely the conclusion drawn by human rights observers. The intelligence law effectively acts as an impenetrable shield. It creates a legal mechanism where the executive branch can take immediate, severe financial action based on secret intelligence, and then, when challenged, cite another law to prevent that intelligence from ever facing judicial scrutiny.
So the implication for judicial review is it's devastating.
It is. If the alleged evidence is permanently shielded from disclosure, how can a judge possibly rule on its merit? The post facto judicial review process, the one intended safeguard against abuse, is rendered completely meaningless. The government gets all the power of the freeze with none of the responsibility to justify it.
This sounds less like a legislative oversight and more like a deliberate, structural barrier to accountability.
It does, and civil society groups in Ecuador recognize this immediately. This is why the legal fight quickly expanded. They didn't just fight the account freezes, they have challenged the intelligence law itself before Ecuador's constitutional court.
They're going after the source of the shield. What's their core argument against the intelligence law?
Their argument is that the law severely weakens judicial and civilian oversight of intelligence operations across the board. They view it as a structural legal barrier deliberately put in place to prevent accountability for actions just like these account freezes. They're challenging the entire legislative architecture that allows the executive branch to operate in this kind of legal vacuum.
This complexity forces us to look outward. How do these actions square with international norms? Specifically, what does the Human Rights Watch critique say about global anti-money laundering standards?
HRW states very clearly that these freezes in Ecuador appear to flatly contradict the established guidance from the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF.
What FATF?
FATF is the global standard setter for combating money laundering and terrorist financing. Compliance with FATF standards is absolutely crucial for any country that wants to be integrated into the global financial system.
Okay, so what does FATF say?
Well, FATF recognizes that nonprofit organizations, NPOs, can be exploited for illicit purposes. But their guidance is very specific about how governments should address this risk. The requirements state that any measures affecting NPOs must be focused, proportionate, and risk-based.
Focused, proportionate, and risk-based. That sounds like a world away from freezing 14 accounts of a recognized environmental justice group that gets EU funding.
It is. Proportionality is key here. A proportionate measure might involve an audit or a request for documents or a targeted investigation into one specific suspicious transaction.
Right.
A disproportionate measure, like freezing every single Bright account associated with a group and its leaders simultaneously, is effectively shutting down the entire organization based on an unsubstantiated claim. HRW argues this violates the spirit, if not the letter, of the international AML standard.
A standard which is designed to catch organized crime, not environmentalists.
Precisely.
And this is really the core insight, isn't it? The aha moment that connects this local political struggle in Ecuador to the global regulatory framework. Juanita Gobertis, she's HRW's Americas director, was very direct in her assessment.
She was. She offered 2 points that neatly summarize the whole HRW position. First, she stated, safeguards intended to prevent money laundering should never be used to target civil society groups for their work or to stop peaceful protests.
So emphasizing the spirit of the law, which is crime prevention, not political suppression.
Right. And her second point cuts directly to the absurdity of the targeting. These mechanisms should be used to fight crime, not environmental groups. When a state deploys its most powerful financial counterterrorism tools against organizations whose funds are transparent and traceable, even if they are politically inconvenient, it fundamentally distorts the purpose of the entire global AML system. It's a profound misuse of compliance language to silence peaceful dissent.
And the story takes an even darker turn once the accounts were restored. So moving into this escalation phase, the financial inconvenience, as devastating as it was really only the first act.
It was just the beginning.
Even after the courts had essentially ruled the initial claims baseless by ordering the funds released, the individuals and organizations found themselves facing new, far more serious legal hurdles.
This is the real mechanism of the long-term chilling effect. The temporary financial constraint was replaced by permanent legal jeopardy.
What happened?
Around the same time as the administrative freezes, criminal investigations were opened against several individuals associated with the groups. And these were not minor administrative inquiries.
What were the charges?
The allegations are serious. They include unjustified private enrichment, which is a corruption-related charge, and, most alarmingly, terrorism financing.
Terrorism financing.
Yes. So consider the implications of that leap. You go from a situation where the government couldn't prove suspicious activity well enough to keep a bank account frozen for a few weeks to now facing a felony charge that could result in years in prison based on the allegation that you funded terrorism.
That dramatically raises the stakes, an allegation of terrorism financing that carries severe reputational damage globally. It makes it impossible for those
people or groups to work with international partners, banks, even travel freely.
It does. It transforms a temporary logistical problem into a life-altering legal and existential threat.
It's designed to be crushing.
Absolutely. Even if the state believes it has a weak case, the mere existence of these criminal charges accomplishes the political goal. It consumes all the organization's time, energy, and financial resources. They have to redirect funds meant for environmental protection or community support toward extensive legal defense.
So the legal process itself becomes the punishment.
It does. It diverts them from their core mission.
Which makes HRW's final appeal in their report incredibly relevant. They were clearly concerned about the integrity of this process moving forward.
Exactly. Juanita Gobertis urged prosecutors and judges to ensure these criminal investigations follow due process, are based on credible evidence, and are not used to unduly restrict the work of environmental and indigenous groups.
That appeal is a direct response to the pattern we've been talking about.
It is. The implication is crystal clear. If the government couldn't muster objective, serious, and verifiable evidence to justify a temporary administrative freeze, there is an immense skepticism that they possess credible evidence to support felony charges like terrorism financing. The pattern strongly suggests the criminal charges are a continuity of the political hammer, aimed at keeping these critical voices quiet for good.
Okay, now, to provide some necessary contextual balance here, let's widen the lens a bit and look at Ecuador's overall financial security environment. Because we have to acknowledge that genuine, large-scale financial crime is not only present but rampant in Ecuador.
That context is absolutely crucial for understanding priorities. HRW's focus is the misuse of AML tools, but the context of the publication, the OCCRP, underscores that the country is simultaneously facing this massive existential threat from organized crime.
So what does that look like?
Ecuador is currently a critical transit point for global drug trafficking, particularly cocaine flowing from neighboring countries. The scale of illicit financial activity necessary to support this trade it dwarfs the operational budget of any environmental NGO. AML tools are desperately needed there.
And the OCCRP's related reporting brings this issue into sharp focus, detailing these complex schemes used by powerful criminal networks that have infiltrated legitimate businesses.
Absolutely. The cocaine and bananas reports are a sobering read. They meticulously detail how Balkan and Mexican drug cartels use Ecuador as a hub, specifically exploiting the massive volumes of high-volume commercial exports like bananas to smuggle vast quantities of cocaine into Europe and Russia.
They cited a record cocaine bust in Russia.
Right. They did. 1,500 bricks of cocaine found concealed in banana shipments. And they noted the logistical connections to shipments originating from Noboa Trading Co.
Okay, and we must insert our essential impartiality check right here.
Yes, this is critical. It is critical to note that we are simply reporting on the OCCRP's published findings. The finding is that serious drug trafficking involving high-level commercial entities, including those connected to the president's family firm, Noboa Trading Co., is a simultaneous, massive, and documented challenge in Ecuador.
We are not making any explicit, unproven claim of a direct causal connection between those drug shipments and the decision to freeze the activist bank account.
No, the purpose is strictly contextual.
So what does this massive context of genuine financial crime, the flow of multi-ton shipments and billions of illicit dollars, tell us when you juxtapose it with this rapid crackdown on activists?
It tells us the political calculus of enforcement is severely skewed. This information highlights an environment where AML tools are absolutely necessary to protect the state from global organized crime. Yet we see the government deploy its brand new fast-track freezing power with total efficiency and speed against relatively small, transparently funded activist groups who are critical of government policy.
Right.
You contrast that with the ongoing decade-long struggle to contain massive, genuine financial crime related to global drug trafficking rings that clearly involve high-level commercial exports. It just forces the question.
What's the question?
If authorities possess the power to instantly paralyze an organization like UDAP by freezing 14 accounts based on secret intelligence, why isn't that same focus and swiftness achieving decisive victories against the enormous illicit flows documented by the OCCRP?
It suggests that the political will and the tactical deployment of these powerful legal tools, they prioritize internal political threats, dissent over policy, above the massive systemic security threat posed by organized international crime.
It seems the ability to use AML mechanisms for political convenience is a far easier path than the hard work of dismantling sophisticated drug trade operations.
Okay, let's try to synthesize the journey we've just taken.
Right. This is a story of three laws converging to cripple civil society. First, the social transparency law was passed to enable immediate financial seizure. Second, the intelligence law was used to shield the purported evidence from any judicial review.
So that action crippled legitimate organizations, forcing them into court.
Where the evidence failed under judicial scrutiny, and then the government escalated the threat using criminal investigations. They effectively turned a temporary financial freeze into a long-term legal battle, thereby achieving the intended chilling effect.
And the relevance to you, the listener, is in understanding the sophisticated nature of modern state suppression.
Exactly. This isn't just about old-fashioned political arrests anymore. It's about using the sophisticated, internationally sanctioned language of financial compliance tools meant to combat genuine global threats like terrorism financing and weaponizing them to suppress internal political dissent.
It creates this critical knowledge gap, where the official plausible justification, which is AML, completely masks the true reality on the ground, which is just political targeting.
It's a profound administrative manipulation of compliance language.
It is. We've seen how financial safeguards intended for the world's worst criminals were deployed against groups whose funds came, in part, from respected international donors. I mean, EU and US-backed development projects intended for vulnerable communities. So here is our final provocative thought for you to consider. What are the wider global implications for international philanthropy and for legitimate development aid?
That's a huge question.
When traceable donor funds can be frozen based on secret, unsubstantiated intelligence, and the recipients are then charged with terrorism financing, the political risk skyrockets. Does this risk force international donors to cut off essential aid to vulnerable communities because the political environment just makes recipient organizations too dangerous to fund?
And if the global AML framework allows this kind of misuse without immediate forceful international rebuke, what happens to the global freedom of civil society everywhere? That's the question that needs to be explored long after the bank accounts are unfrozen.